So I'm Mitch Wong. I'm the director of the KL2 program across the 4 institutions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the KL2 application process for this upcoming year, and the deadlines are very soon, and then also talk about our successful grant repository. So the KL2 award is structured very similarly to the K award. In the next section, you'll hear a bit more of the details about the K award, the different sections, and an approach to writing it. And so to give you a brief overview of how our KL2 program is similar, but also a little bit different. Again, this is an award for junior faculty, and it's limited to those who are faculty within the UCLA CTSI consortium. So you need to be at a faculty level position at UCLA, Harbor, Cedars, or Drew. The grant is to support people who are doing interdisciplinary translational science. That includes people who are doing basic research, clinical research, or health services outcomes research. What we expect of individual investigators is that you are in one of these areas. We don't expect that you as an individual would cover all of these areas. I hope that is clear. We have a number of people, often people come and say, well, I do basic science research, and I say that's great. As long as there is some relationship to translational science in your future, then that would be sufficient. But you in your own project don't need to meet all the qualifications of being translational all the way to treating humans in your own proposal. The structure of the grant and the award is very similar to a K08, K23, or K01, with a few minor details, and I'm going to go through some of those differences here. So we do say it's an annual award, renewable up to 3 years. The reason why we say it's an annual award is because each year in our grant we have to review the processes of making sure that you're making the adequate progress on the grant. But we do think of it as a 3-year award. It is up to a 3-year award because there are reasons why someone might come off of a KL2, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. But it's essentially a 3-year award, and of course, if you may or may not know, the CTSI is in a renewal year. So the major umbrella grant was submitted last fall. We're hoping to hear in the next 2-3 months about our score. So assuming we get renewed, this KL2 program will proceed forward. People ask me, well, what if we don't get renewed? And I'm saying, well, that's not going to happen. But if it did happen, I anticipate and I hope that we would be able to continue this grant mechanism in some shape or form for this upcoming year in a transition year. But our plan is to anticipate that we'll get the renewal and proceed as we have in the last 4 years. So the grant provides $75,000 of support, salary support plus benefits, $25,000 for research, $4,000 for tuition and coursework, $2,000 for travel, and an additional in-kind support, about $1,500 for statistical support through the CTSI statistical support group. The one thing to note here, just in terms of the fungibility of this allocation of support, the tuition and coursework is very specific. It is for if you are enrolling in a course, enrolling in a for-credit or not-for-credit course. If you go to a national meeting, this is a common question, if you go to a national meeting and they're holding a seminar, if there's no charge for the seminar, the only charge is the cost to go to the national meeting. That would not count as tuition or coursework. But if there's a separate charge just to take that seminar at the national meeting, then that would be a charge that you could put on that line item. If you have, by the way, if you have questions about what counts and what doesn't count, you can send your questions to us and we'll be able to answer them. Eligibility, you should have a doctoral level research degree or professional degree with advanced research training, ideally. It is critical that you have a faculty level title that must be as of July 1st, 2016. If you're currently in a fellow title or a training title, resident fellow, but you will become a faculty as of July 1st, that's fine. We will ask to see that you have confirmation of that faculty title. Usually that will come in the means of a letter of support from your chair or your institution that indicates that you have a guaranteed title starting July 1st, 2016. You must commit 75% of your effort towards the translational research aims of your KL2. If you are in a procedural specialty such as surgery or a surgical subspecialty where you need to be in the OR, for example, you can reduce that time to 50%. This is a very similar policy that NIH has, and we follow the same guidelines around that. If you have questions about that, you can certainly ask us. A common corollary to that is someone who's a cardiologist and is working in the EP lab, working in the EP setting, says, well, I need to be in the EP lab to take care of patients. That actually is not within the guidelines of NIH to allow you to reduce your time. You, of course, need to be a U.S. citizen or non-citizen, national, permanent, or U.S. resident. These are the same guidelines that NIH follows. There's a lot of questions about eligibility based on prior grant funding. If you've had a small grant, such as an R03 or R21, you are certainly eligible to write K. But if you've had a large prior grant, such as an R01 or a PR01, as the principal investigator, that would automatically make you ineligible for an NIH-K award and also an NIH KL2 award. If you were a co-investigator on someone else's R01, that would not preclude you from submitting your own K. You may have had prior K-12 funding. The idea of a KL2 is that the institution gets the K award money, and then we decide internally to give out these awards. That's the same mechanism that you may have heard about called a K-12 mechanism. They changed the letters when it became part of the CTSI, so they changed from K-12 to KL2, but it's essentially the same idea. There are individuals who have been on a K-12 and then switched to a KL2, and that is fine. I mentioned this before about prior being a PI of a prior NIH R01 or equivalent grant, and there the definition is where the direct cost of that grant is greater than $100,000 per year. If you've been the PI of a VA Career Development Award or an equivalent VA R01 level award, then that would also preclude you from applying and being eligible for the KL2. If you are a co-investigator on a current R01, you can apply for the KL2, but you'll have to give up the funding and support on that R01 as a co-investigator. What about future funding? So if you receive a KL2, one of the NIH KL2 spots, it does limit you in terms of future funding in some ways. So let's say you're in your first year of a K08 or K23 or a KL2. You technically couldn't apply for an R01. You could apply for an R01, but you'd have to give up. And if you were successfully awarded the R01, you'd have to give up your K award funding. With the exception that when you're in your last 2 years, is it 2 years, Carol? If you're in your last 2 years of your K award, then you can be PI of an R01. Let's see. Also, the total amount of time that you spend on a career development award, that would be a KL2 and then a K08, K23. So that's a very common scenario. We have people who are receiving a KL2. We highly encourage our KL2 successful awardees to submit immediately a K08, K23. And we've had a number of people make that successful transition. Once you switch over to K08, K23, the total amount of time that you are on a K award cannot exceed 5 years, but sometimes they'll let you go to 6. And it's a little bit institute specific, and it has to be approved by the project officer and the institute. But we have seen some people get as many as 6 years total between an individual or institutional K and an individual K. And as I said, the KL2 awards can apply for subsequent RO funding. If you're in your last 2 years, you can decrease your effort on the KL2 down, or your K08, K23 down 50%. The selection criteria, some of this will be gone over in the next talk, but there really are several main components. Each one of these is quite important. Most people will focus heavily on the proposed research, and that's what you've been working on for the last several years, I'm sure, and have thought about it, and your mentor will probably go over that very carefully with you about the appropriate design, research aims, addressing the significance and innovation of your project. These are all really quite important. But of course, this is a K award, so you as a candidate will be carefully considered. Your track record, your number of publication, the quality of those publications, the productivity and promise of you as a future investigator who will be independent and a highly valued member of the scientific community. Mentorship is really important. You'll hear again a little more about this, but the track record of your mentor will be closely looked at. Ideally, someone who has current NIH funding from the institute that you're applying to. As far as the KL2 goes, right, we don't necessarily think specifically about the way that institutes might look at their own individual portfolio and scientific agenda, but we do look carefully at your mentor, what's their track record of mentorship, and what's their track record in funding as a scientist themselves, and do they have the research and support to make sure that you're going to be successful, both from a financial resources standpoint, but also from a scientific expertise standpoint. Then there's the educational plan, and I think this is an area where people sort of maybe fall off the tracks a little bit because it's something that they haven't thought a lot about. But this is a really critical piece. The educational plan needs to be very specific. It tends to be, some people tend to write a very short educational plan with not a lot of specifics. It tends to be very vague. It fails to indicate where they're going to learn new skills and what skills they're going to learn and how they're going to learn it. Those new skills, whether it be methodologic and ideally methodologic and or content area related, those two things that you need to learn, those three things you need to learn, need to be tightly integrated with your research plan. So if you're going to propose that you're going to, understand the new mechanism, and then your educational plan talks about getting clinical trial design methodology, there's a disconnect there. So you really want to make sure that the specific aims of your proposal tightly integrate with your educational plan. The one thing that you can do is that maybe in your research plan, there's something additional that you want to learn because it would be important for the next step of your career. Then you can include some additional things in your educational plan. But there needs to be a very good explanation for what you're going to learn, why you're going to learn it, and how does it integrate with your research and your career trajectory. And again, specificity is really important. It's really important to include specific coursework, classes, content, who's going to teach you those things. And it comes back to your mentorship team. People have a mentor, but then they have additional mentors. Those additional mentors are to teach them the specific new things that they need to learn so that this individual can be successful. And I will reemphasize the word new. If you've been doing a set of research for the last 5 years, and you, after those 5 years, have a strong record of doing a certain set of techniques and tools and content area, if you write a K award to write and do the same kind of stuff, it's not going to, people would say, well, why do you need a K award? Why shouldn't you just go ahead and write an individual R21, R03, or R01? And as Carol said, at least for the KL2, the environment, we all know well the environment. In your case, for this writing of the KL2, it's just important to understand how does your division, your department, your institution want to able to support you so that your work is feasible, given the support that you have. I'm not going to go through every detail of the application component. It's actually online. I'm going to just highlight just a few things here. This is very much structured around a traditional K08, K23, K01 award. One thing that we have done to make it a little bit easier on you is that the application now is 12 pages. This is exactly the same format as the K awards now. It's twice the length that we had for last year. So if you applied in past years and you were limited to 6 pages, you probably struggled to get it down from 12 pages to 6 pages. It's very hard to write and know what to drop and exclude in 6 pages. So we thought we'd make it easier on you and harder on our reviewers by allowing you to write 12 pages. The rest of it here is listed, and if you have questions about any specific pieces, I can take questions at the lunch hour. The timeline. I mentioned this before, we're in a renewal year, and so the number of applications that we'll award this year is contingent upon getting renewed. If you haven't already submitted a letter of intent, you can still submit a letter of intent. February 1st was the deadline. The reason for the letter of intent is we get a lot of applications, and I think we have a record number of people who have indicated the intention to submit a KL2 award this year. You can imagine if we get 50 applications, it's hard for us to find the right reviewer and enough reviewers to get your application carefully considered. So it really helps us if you let us know ahead of time that you are going to submit. All you're required to do is submit a title and a few other things. This helps us identify potential reviewers earlier. And there's a huge advantage because you do not want to have spend all of your time writing this grant and then only to have it reviewed by someone who really doesn't understand the content area or the methodology of your proposal. So it really is to your advantage to let us know early on. And so even if you plan on applying, but you've missed the letter of intent deadline, you can still send that information to us. The final deadline is February 22nd. I will remind you that it's an online application. We occasionally get people who have a hard time logging into the system. I recommend that if you haven't logged into the system and you plan on submitting, don't wait till the last day to do that. You should go ahead and log in now. Make sure that your login and password work, that you can get into the system, and that you have a sense of what needs to be uploaded. Do that now, and then so that on the final day, when you submit, you won't have any technical problems. If you do have technical problems, you can still contact us and we'll help you and troubleshoot. But if you can submit even earlier, that does help us. We will be doing reviews through February, March, and have a study section in mid-April, late April, and then awardees will be notified in May or as late as June, depending on whether we find out we're renewed for the grant. And the timeline for your grant should be starting on July 1st, 2016. That's not negotiable. That's required under the NCATS guidelines of our KL2 program. So I'm going to just talk real briefly about this last piece, which is a little bit different. If you haven't already taken a look, you absolutely should. There's nothing more helpful than writing a successful grant than seeing what a successful grant looks like. There are many, many ways to write a really well-written grant that will be successful in terms of format, in terms of style, in terms of what's the right balance of text and figures. How do I format this so that it looks good? It's really important that you make reading the grant as easy as possible for the reader because they're going to have limited time to absorb everything you're trying to convey. And so to really get a sense for grantsmanship and what, in terms of style, format, content, the CTSI Grant Proposal Online Library is really an important resource. Currently, you can see K awards, U awards. We're adding to that. We'll be writing, including R awards. You can maybe resources pages, which describe the institution, I think is going to be going up there if it's not already there. And so it's a secure platform for sharing grants. It requires our people who contribute to this to contribute something that they spend a lot of time and feel very protective of. So we try to protect that information so that it doesn't get widely disseminated. So you do have to log in yourself and request access to it. There's a video instructions on how to request access, and it's time limited. So after a period of time, your access will go away. You have to reapply. The information is here, and you can write it down here. It's on the main page of the CTSI website when you log into resources. Just briefly, this is what it looks like. And when you do log in, you will be able to view the grant, but you will not be able to download, print, copy and paste, or any of those other things. It just allows you to view it. It's kind of like if you go to Amazon and you're looking at books, it'll show you the first few pages of a book. This is the same technology, but it's really quite useful for you to be able to see both formatting and kind of generally how other people who've been very successful getting grants were able to get their grant funded, and it gives you that information. If you have any questions about logging on, if you have any problems, again, you can ask us and we'll help you through that process. So I think we have about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back. Isidro just walked in. We changed the organization of the agenda. Yeah.